Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Today we're here to talk some Giants football. We're back, baby, and we're talking today a topic that I've seen pretty hot on the streets of Giants Twitter among Giants fans, and that's, should General Manager Joe Schoen be on the hot seat? Meaning, hot seat, you get a job done, or you might be fired. And will you be fired? So there's so much to unpack when it comes to this. And Nick and I went over what we wanted to do to kind of, approach this topic of, should Joe Schoen, the Giants general manager, be on the hot seat? And I think there's different ways to go about it. Where we're going to start, Nick, is by going back to where it all started after the 2021 season, when Joe Schoen did come in 2022. Where were the Giants at? What was he working with? But I also want to look at this thing from a 30,000 foot view. So I kind of want to start there, Nick, and then we can get into the timeline. From a 30,000 foot view, I think about it like this. What are the Giants accomplishing should they move on from Joe Schoen next offseason? And in that same breath, when do you feel like it's fair to know if a general manager should be moved on from, or if a general manager has been given enough time to put in his blueprint? When we've discussed in the past, Nick, how much goes into like this build and this idea, like you get in, you start something in place, and then it's really taking time and you're really putting all these pieces together as it goes. When do you, generally speaking, what do you think is a fair number for what any general manager should get? Or are circumstances important in that?
Dan, I think the circumstances are important in that. I think the context is important in that. And I think when it comes to Joe Schoen, a lot of this comes down to the fact that they had to come up with another plan after winning in their first season, when they thought that first season was going to be just a rebuild year. They did not pick up Daniel Jones' fifth-year option. They thought they were going to suck. And they ended up going, 6-1, 7-2 after the bye week. And I think that just rechanged all of their plans. And they said, yes, let's bring the band back. Woo, let's go. And then we saw how that manifested and what ended up happening. The Giants sucked in 2023. And now we are here in 2024, and we're looking at the New York Giants, and we're saying, yeah, we possibly should get rid of Joe Schoen at this point. I think it's just a little bit too premature for the same fact that you brought up. What is that accomplishing?
That's really where
it's just a new face to bring in here. It's saying that you do not trust the path that Joe Schoen has put the New York Giants on right now. And if you feel that way, fine. And we're going to go through a lot of reasons as to why you possibly came to that conclusion. But as of right now, I think that's premature for a lot of reasons we've brought up over the last couple months. Bringing in new personnel, as we've seen, new front office management every 2 years, every 3 years, it does not do your franchise any justice whatsoever. And if the Giants stuck with Dave Gettleman as long as they did, and then they get rid of Joe Schoen after 2.5, 3 years, that really says something about John Mara.
Yeah, well, you can look at it from one way. And I think the counter to that some people might say, though, I am more along the lines of where you're at, Nick, and we'll discuss individual things as well, not just overall stuff. The counter to that would be, well, they learned from their mistake with Gettleman, that they hung on to him too long, and they don't want to make that same mistake again. Now, the reason I might provide a counter to that counter would be, I obviously famously, we discussed on the podcast, I was ready to move on from Dave after year 2. To be completely honest, I was even struggling to give him more than a year. I knew right away in 2018 it was over when he decided to take Barkley at 2, the running back, and not listen to trade offers. I'm better than you. I know how to do this thing better than you. I can do this draft better than you. Don't even pick up the phone. Oh, Sean Payton's calling with a Godfather offer to move up to 2 for Darnold. Don't even listen to it. I'm getting the best player in the draft class in Saquon Barkley. He's touched by the hand of God. He's a Hall of Fame player. The minute that happened, I knew we were in trouble, but I needed a full offseason at least after that to really lock into, this is not the guy. And that's from a process standpoint. Mistakes like drafting Sam Beal in the supplemental draft, dumping a top 70 pick in the next class, dumping all the contracts the way he did, mismanaging the cap, everything he did. That was bad.
Williams, that was 2019 too.
Leonard Williams, trading for a player who's an impending free agent when you're at 2-7, losing all negotiation leverage there, and also in just trading for a player at 2-7 made no sense. He also, that was the year he did the Omame contract, the Solder contract, all of those things that came into play. So I knew it early there. And people might say, why were you so ready to move on from Dave Gettleman so fast? And now, you're saying that was fair, but it's unfair. But you're saying it's unfair to move on from Joe Schoen. My counter to that would be process versus results. And to that stands, you could tell really early that Dave Gettleman's process was unbelievably bad. One of the worst processes we've seen from any general manager, I think, in the last decade. You may not agree with that, but 31 other fan bases view him as one of the worst general managers in the last decade. So that's just where other people are at with it. It's similar to the Daniel Jones debate. The Giants fans see it differently than the rest of the NFL sees it. Just quite frank. And that's not to say they're right and they're wrong. It's just how it is. But at that point, you ask yourself, Nick, from a 30,000-foot view, how much am I overvaluing process at that point? Because with Schoen at this point, we can say for sure his process is better than Dave Gettleman's. And I even think his process is good, though. That's a debate we're going to have on this podcast. And that's going to get into if he should be on the hot seat or not. And we'll get into individual stuff. But results, at what point do you say, 3 years in, the results have to be there for the process to even matter? At this point, the results have the weight of this and the process has the weight of this. So I need results. At what point do you feel that way? Or do you feel like, some of these things take time to get results?
I think some of these things take time, but the common denominator through the Dave Gettleman era is still the common denominator through the Joe Schoen era.
No O-line?
I would say the quarterback position,
Okay.
but no offensive line hasn't helped. But Joe Schoen is culpable in some of that because he has selected certain offensive linemen who have not developed. I'm not sitting here saying Joe Schoen shouldn't be discussed in the conversation to have a hot seat. I just think it's very premature to say we should get rid of him because of all the things you already alluded to. I think the process is a lot better, and I don't think we should even use Dave Gettleman as a benchmark. And if I did that earlier, that's my mistake because that is a very low bench if he's going to be the benchmark of whether you should be fired or not. Regarding Joe Schoen specifically, Dan, I have trusted his process. I think he has made a lot of savvy and shrewd moves throughout his time as general manager that have benefited the New York Giants in the long run. And right now, I'm still willing to give him another year to see how his first draft class develops with some different coaching pieces in place. And if that doesn't happen and this team sucks again, then I really think the conversation has to be entertained and even possibly more so. But right now, no, I think it's a little bit premature.
I really like the way you came at that, and we're going to unpack those more individually as we get through this podcast, looking from the start of where he took over, individual moves. We're going to go through every free agency, all the shrewd moves that Nick alluded to there. We're going to get into them because I do think that we're not just looking at a general manager who set a blueprint, set a plan, had a good process, and done nothing good. He's had shrewd moves. He's had value moves that he's made as a general manager, trading. I mean, the most obvious one to me is trading that draft pick, trading Leonard Williams last offseason for the Seattle draft pick, which obviously the Giants ultimately used in a way that's going to hopefully help the team right away, or if not in the future. There are moves that we're going to get into, but at the same time, when do you start entertaining the results part? And that's what I want to get into in this.
100%. And I want to get into this first because
Sure.
What is the impetus of this conversation? Why are we even discussing Joe Schoen being on the hot seat beyond just the fact that they had a catastrophically bad 2023 season? I think one of the reasons why they had a catastrophically bad 2023 season was because of one decision. It was bring the band back together, which was not a part of the original plans of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. We have to acknowledge how unique of a situation it was of the New York Giants for this general manager and this front office group to experience a winning season and them actually winning a playoff game for the first time since Super Bowl 46. And then them all coming together and saying, I think we can do this again. And that was the mistake. They thought they could do it again. And I guess they didn't acknowledge the fact that there was a lot of fortuity involved in them winning a lot of those games, right? There was a lot of fortune involved. It sucks because that's just football sometimes. And I would say Murphy's Law applied to the 2023 season, whereas 2022, they benefited from some luck, right? 2023, everything went wrong. They had absolutely no luck. It was a 0th percentile type of season.
So that's just like the variance. It's like the variance game in poker and anything that involves variance. They were at the highest peak of the variance and the lowest peak of the variance within a span of 1 year. But I think what you said is really interesting there as far as, what we're going to use as the barometer for Joe Schoen. We're going to go and we're going to unpack the timeline here. Yeah. One more 30,000-foot view thought on this, Nick, before we unpack the timeline. I think about this in my head from the overall standpoint, and I wonder, Nick, would this conversation about Joe Schoen being on the hot seat even be happening if the Giants selected a quarterback in the draft? And let's say they weren't able to trade up for the guy they have a conviction on, Drake May or Caleb Williams, and they just said, F it, let's take Penix or JJ, which some people wanted them to do. I'm not so sure those same people who are the people who are putting him on the hot seat would be having him on the hot seat right now if he went with the quarterback. But I'm not so sure that makes that plan the right plan just because you wouldn't be, quote unquote, publicly perceived as being on the hot seat. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you brought up the word right there, conviction. Look, I don't think we should enter the 2024 season with the thought that the Giants and the current brass of the New York Giants think Daniel Jones is the long-term answer. You could say last season when they gave him the contract, that was possibly what they were thinking. They gave him that contract, even though they designed the out in the contract. The Giants wanted to trade up to 3. The Giants wanted to get their quarterback, right? It wasn't for trading up to Joe Alt. That was all bullshit. They wanted to trade up to 3 to get Drake May and get their long-term quarterback that they can build and be the face of this franchise for a decade plus, hopefully, right? That did not happen. So why would I want Joe Schoen to put all of his chips in to the JJ McCarthy, the Michael Penix, the Bo Nix train if he wasn't sold and if he did not have that conviction that he had on Drake May? It just so happened the Giants ended up going on that 3-game winning streak. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have won those games or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But they went on that 3-game winning streak with Tommy DeVito and they dropped down in the draft and then they basically played themselves out of selecting Drake May. That's just the reality of the situation. But I don't believe Joe Schoen is sitting here like, oh yeah, Daniel Jones is definitely our guy. He's going to say that to all of us idiots. But inside of the office, they know Daniel Jones is gone next year if they can get away from that contract. And they are looking for replacements. And they wanted to get a replacement desperately. They wanted to trade up. They were going to trade next year's first round pick to go up and get Drake May, Dan. But the Patriots said, we like him too. Go fuck yourself, basically. And that's the reality of the situation. So I think that's a really good point because if Joe Schoen, and I don't think this would have been the right move. This would have been like a Dave Gettleman type of move.
Right.
If Joe Schoen said, hey, you know what? We don't really like JJ that much, but we need a quarterback. We need to kind of extend the fan base's love for us and buy us some more time because we could suck this year. And if we have JJ, in the arsenal, probably going to get another year. So let's just select him and screw Malik Neighbors. We don't really need that star wide. Let's just get that guy, even though we don't love him and Brian Daboll doesn't love him. That would have been the net negative move.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to be clear about what Nick's saying here. Because I agree with Nick and I know what he's saying here. He's not saying that our evaluation, Nick and I's evaluation is correct, that JJ McCarthy or Penix or Nix or whoever they could have gotten at 6 is definitely not going to be a star quarterback. We know that this is a crapshoot quarterback. What we're saying is if the Giants and Joe Schoen, and this is clearly the case, didn't believe in those quarterbacks and have a conviction on those quarterbacks, whether they're right or wrong on the quarterback evaluation part is not important. Let's just focus on this aspect of it. If they didn't have the conviction to then take the quarterback anyway, is actually the selfish move by the general manager. I made this point before. He made the selfless move by going for Neighbors. The selfish move is you force the quarterback because it buys you time. And it's very reminiscent in my mind of the same mistake that Dave Gettleman made in 2019. He came into 2018. He said, we still believe in Eli. I watched the tape against whatever team, the Philly, the arm talent's there. Let's go. And then let's go running back and we'll build around Eli. Then he's like, Eli's not there. And in 2019, he's like, oh God, Herbert's going back to college. That was my guy. I watched 6 games of him. I don't know. Let's watch some tape. Oh, go down to the Senior Bowl. Yeah, Daniel Jones commanded the huddle well in that Senior Bowl. And then he said he fell in full bloom love with the quarterback based on a Senior Bowl week and then going back on watching tape of that quarterback. That's the path that leads you to really bad years, not the path of passing on said quarterback that you don't believe in my mind, at least. And I think in Nick's mind as well. Now, a lot of people disagree with that, and that's understandable, but that's how we feel with it. So I feel like he made the selfless move here by going for Malik Neighbors or whoever it would be that he had the highest grade on that point. But that can be debated. And I know it would have bought him time, Nick. That is undeniable. If he had gone any quarterback, you can name any person, it doesn't matter, Penix, whatever, he would have been bought more time. And people wouldn't say he's on the hot seat. They'd be like, all right, now he gets his quarterback. Now he gets time to let the quarterback develop and all of that nature. But I'm not so sure just because that narrative changes so much based on one decision that's fair. And that's what we're going to get into today and unpack, because I don't think you should base decisions around that. But let's start here, Nick, by where we were at, you and I, on this podcast after the 2021 season. This is a fun thing to start with. You went back and listened to a podcast that we did, our thoughts after 2021. Remember, there was a bottom out period in 2021. Joe Judge got fired. They got rid of the Jason Garrett offense. They got rid of Dave Gettleman finally, and they brought in Joe Schoen. And here's where our thoughts, our biggest 5 thoughts, and we had a bonus each. So I'm going to go over them and let's see where we were at with them in 2021 and where we're at now with them after Joe Schoen has had some time to potentially fix them. Some harder to fix than others, and we'll go into that.
You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out Ag1. When I started drinking Ag1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because Ag1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
All right, Nick, I'll read mine, then you could read yours. My number one, and I'll read mine and let's unpack them one by one. My number one was Will Hernandez is not a long-term answer on the interior. That one we don't need to get into too much. It proved to be right. Number two, the Giants aren't ready for a 10-win season. The Giants don't have the cast in place currently for a functional passing game. That one proved wrong, Nick. They were ready for a 10-win season, and at least famously, or not a 10-plus win season, I said. I guess they didn't win 10-plus. They won 9, but it's close enough, I think, for that one to be wrong. And to be fair, in August, I made my prediction, and I had the Giants winning 9 games. So obviously things had changed, and I felt like...
Well, they did win a playoff game, too.
And they won a playoff game, too. So obviously things had changed, and I felt like they did enough to improve the roster. Number 3, the Giants may have found a unicorn player in Xavier McKinney. That one, I don't know. I mean, he signed with the Packers for a massive deal. That was obviously coming off 2021 with Patrick Graham, where I really loved him in that system and the way he played the deep half and the way he played that post. And obviously, he didn't play that position as the same way with Wink Martindale, as he was used in a lot of different ways. So we'll leave that one as open-ended. Number 4 for me was the Giants lack depth and starters at inside linebacker. That one proved correct. 2022
correct,
was a disaster in 2022, and they fixed that fast, though. Joe Schoen really worked to fix that fast with the McFadden draft pick, which has been solid, if not better, and the Okereke signing, which has been a slam dunk. Number 5 was Darius Slayton is not the late round gem we thought he could be. That one's debatable. I think what I meant by that was gem, like breakout. You hit a 5th round pick that's like a wide receiver 1. He's not that. He's a solid player for your team. And then number 6 for me, the bonus was the Giants still need an alpha one-on-one pass rusher, which I still feel like has proven true to this point. Now, I know Kayvon Thibodeau had a lot of sacks last year. I wouldn't call him at any point last year an alpha one-on-one pass rusher. He had moments of it against the Jets, things of that nature, but there wasn't really that alpha one-on-one feel for him, though. Dexter Lawrence, honestly, could be argued as potentially. It's a little different from the interior and alpha one-on-one, but I think what I meant is off the edge. Hopefully, Joe Schoen has now fixed that with Brian Burns. What are your thoughts on any of those 6 before you get into yours?
Yeah, I love this, dude. So let's just start with that sixth one. Kayvon Thibodeau, they selected him in the top 5. We identified that as definitely an
True.
issue. And then they selected Kayvon Thibodeau. And then one off season, they were like, oh, let's see how Kayvon Thibodeau progresses. And then the next off season, like, let's trade a second round pick and get Brian Burns and lock him up long term. So now you have Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Azeez Ojulari on the edge. And I would still say they probably need another presence there, because behind those three, you got like who? Boogie Basham, we're talking about. It gets a little weak at that point. And I think everything else you hit on pretty well. Number 4, the Giants' lack of depth in starters at the inside linebacker position. That was the biggest issue with the 2022 Giants.
Yeah.
Everything broke the Giants' way in 2022. They were still 28th in run defense per yardage. They were terrible in run defense, and they did not know how to fit power gap concepts, specifically counter. And every team that ran that just ran it ad nauseum against the Giants.
And Jalen Smith on the field is never what you want. Let's get into year 6, Nick.
Yes. So I had number 1, prioritizing receiving weapons won't fix a broken offense. Now that was more so in line with Jason Garrett's offense. That was, I think, a shot at Jason Garrett's offense when Dable came in. I think we saw in 2022 through certain parts of the season that the offense could get humming. Now I think a lot of that was due to really poor defense, but down the stretch, they developed an 11 personnel quick passing attack that was pretty efficient. So I'll give them credit there for the 2022 offense. Number 2 is continuity for continuity's sake isn't always the right answer. That proved certain for sure. Number 3 is it can get worse. After being the 31st ranked offense in 2020, 2021 was a disaster. And I think they were 31st in points in 2021 as well. But it was it was just such an eyesore to watch the New York Giants back in that day. Number 4 is coaching hubris on the offensive line was a huge mistake. The depth was always an issue. We talked about that a lot back in 2021, Dan. We talked about
that a lot last year.
I know. And that came back to roost and bit this current regime in the ass. But we remember we were saying we need to draft offensive linemen. That's what we were saying so much back in 2021. We liked Aaron Banks. We wanted them to go after tackle. And they were like, nah, we got Matt Parrott. We're going to try him out at right tackle. How's that work for you? It's going to work. And no, it didn't. It was an absolute catastrophe.
Let's stop there for a quick second. Are we potentially repeating that same mistake with Evan Neal?
I've thought about that a lot. Now, Evan Neal was a top 10 pick. Evan Neal had incredible tape in the SEC at multiple positions. Evan Neal was a freshman All-American as a right tackle. I don't think we are. Okay. I don't. I can understand how one would say, look, we're making the same mistake. I think the big difference is you signed 4 players to help rectify that offensive line. Now, Evan Neal, if he doesn't work, you have someone who is familiar with Carmen Bracillo in place, who has good tape with Carmen Bracillo to slide in and start. And it's not going to necessarily kill the rest of your line because you signed Aaron Stinney and John Runyon. You still have Josh Azudu. And I don't know if you want to rely on McKeithen, but he's there as well. And that's just under the assumption that Evan Neal won't be kicked inside the guard. Like if Evan Neal disappeared or got injured, you still have contingency plans in place. And that's all I want. And that's another thing about Joe Schoen that I like too, Dan. When he identifies an issue going into an offseason, he brings in assets. He signs players and he brings in contingency plans. He did it after 2022 with Bobby Okereke, with Raheem Nunez-Roches, with Ashawn Robinson to shore up the run defense. Now, it didn't necessarily work statistically, because the New York Giants offense was so bad that the defense ended up giving up a ton of rushing yards. But then this offseason, offensive line was such a disaster, and they relied so much on young guys that they drafted, but they did not develop properly. So now they went out and they signed those free agents. So I appreciate that. Anything on that before I get into the final 2 points?
Nothing more to really add, Nick. I will say you've been harping on this for quite some time, and you've been pretty spot on with this for quite some time. So just one of these tropes that can a lot as we go through each of our 6, everyone can reflect on what they were. Some of these tropes, man, are still like 3 or 4 of these are still the same 3 years later and been with the Giants for a long time. Just something interesting to think about how long it takes for some of these franchises to really change their feather and, go a different route and get out of being stuck in the mud in some ways.
My 5th one was the Giants didn't run more man coverage with the addition of Adoree Jackson, but it did run it more consistently in the right situations. And that's more so just for Patrick Graham. It's not as applicable to the current state of the Giants. And then my 6th was, and this is funny, I've been saying this one for years, another year, and we're still uncertain about Daniel Jones.
Yeah. I mean, look, we've been saying that one for the entirety. Somehow it's 6 years in, but we're still at the same point with that one.
I don't know if we're at the same point with that one. I think some people are at the same point with that one.
Sure. I guess for you and I, we're pretty decided, though. Look, I, I think we both think that he can still get back to the 2022 level or better. It's just a matter of
That's
what
not
is
$40 million. That's
that's
the
not
problem.
you can't win with that cap hit. That's the
Yeah.
biggest issue with Jones. Like there's no ceiling in our minds that can get him to the point of like even like so a team that's been a good example. Like if you're looking at the like maybe the ceiling side of Jones, where you said we're still uncertain. That was in 2021. Now it's after 2023, we're in 2024. We still feel that way. Maybe not as uncertain, maybe more certain that it's not going to work. But like the Lions won. Were almost in the Super Bowl last year with Jared Goff making a lot of money against their cap. My whole thought, though, is I don't know necessarily anymore if that's a realistic ceiling for Daniel Jones to be as productive as Goff was last year. Obviously, different players completely. One runs, one doesn't. But Goff was really productive last year. And you can't say in 2022 Jones was as good as Goff was last year because that's not fair to Goff. And it's not fair to the Lions passing game last year at all in any way whatsoever, or the Lions offense last year. So that's a whole new level he needs to unlock. And you could say, okay, well, you got him Malik Neighbors. Let's do it. And that may be the case, but things in Daniel's game that have to change immediately are the pocket manipulation, the pocket presence, the feel in the pocket, the anticipatory throwing, the throwing into windows he hasn't thrown into, all of these things that are just like part of his game that are unrelated to the rest of what's around him. So I think it's really important to know you can potentially win and have a ceiling as a team with a not elite quarterback making that 40 million, because the Lions are kind of trying to prove that right now, because I don't think we'd say Goff is elite, Nick. But it has to be that next level down. It can't be any further down.
I want to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
Guess how many yards, touchdowns, and interceptions Jared Goff had last year?
A lot. I mean, he had a really good year. And let's hear it. I want to know what those numbers are.
5,411 yards.
He threw for 5,000 yards last year?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about 5,000 yards. Jones doesn't even throw for 3,500.
Now, this is with the playoffs included. Now, let me get rid of the playoffs.
Yeah.
4,574.
Still
30 touchdowns, 12 interceptions.
Yeah. So that's if Jones can get to that level for the Giants this year, that's when I think it's fair to consider him as a possibility moving forward. At that point, more than a possibility, you probably just move forward with him. If he goes 4,500, 30, and 12 in that range for the Giants, that's where it's fair, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I agree, especially because Jones is going to add a lot more with his legs than Jared Goff will.
You think? We don't know coming off the ACL. We hope.
I still think he will, because Jones is a very good athlete.
Yes,
but he might not run.
For Jones, though, is to take away some of what he's doing with his legs and turn that into his passing yards. You know what I mean? Like, that's the objective. Don't put your body at risk by scrambling. Throw the football. Make it happen with your arm, please. God.
But I wanted to lay this out because I think we have to go back to the 2021 season to remember where a lot of the Giants fan bases were, or fan base was, and where we were too. And that's where we were. The Giants were terrible. And Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll came in here to try to bring the New York Giants back to an actual prideful organization. Now, have they done that quite yet? I would say no. But they did have a very good season in their first season. They were what? I think after the 2021 season, 2021, they went 4-13. They had one road win. And I think they lost like their final 6 games in 7 of their last 8. They finished 31st in points for, 23rd in points against. They were just an abomination of a team, and everyone was a laughing stock at the end of the season that actually ended up getting a coach fired, despite the fact that John Mara was so reluctant to fire him. If you remember, he was like, I still think there's a really good coach there, but we're going to go in another direction. They did not want to fire Joe Judge, but he's like, I think it's just what we have to do at this point because we're parting ways with Dave Gettleman. We don't want to be in a John Idzig, Rex Ryan type of situation. That was the right move by John Mara. But now we're only 2 years removed from that, and we're already 2.5 years removed from that, and we're already talking about possibly doing it to Joe Schoen. Again, I just think it's premature.
That was an interesting John Mara impression. It wasn't bad. It was like kind of know where you're getting at with that. It's like that deep.
It's very deep.
It's a deep voice, and it's almost like it's like hoarse. It's like a deep hoarse voice. It almost always talks John Mara like he lost his voice at some point that day or that
Maybe
week.
He's celebrating that much during the games.
No, he's not celebrating. He's throwing chairs in his suite.
He's screaming. You're right. What the hell am I talking
chairs
about?
In the suite. But I think it is important to understand when it comes to the Joe Schoen timeline and where Joe Schoen's at right now and what our expectations should be, where it started in year 1, because he didn't inherit the same situation that Adam Peters inherited. A clean salary cap situation, some inherited talent. He didn't inherit the same situation that Nick Caserio inherited with the Texans, a lot of draft picks via Deshaun Watson trade, a clean scenario, a clean situation from a salary cap situation. He didn't inherit extra draft picks. He also inherited the opposite of a clean salary cap situation. The Giants used a void year on Kenny Galladay's contract. They had Leonard Williams, Adoree Jackson, Kyle Rudolph signed in just before Joe Schoen got here. When Joe Schoen arrived, the Giants had $53,752,000 in dead cap, the sixth most dead salary cap in the entire NFL. For those who don't know what that means, dead salary cap means salary cap space that's being allocated to players that are no longer on your roster. They were part of Dave Gettleman's rosters. They were cut, and the Giants had to use $53 million of their cap, which back in 2022 was a big chunk of that cap, really big chunk of that cap. We're talking about 25%, almost 25% of their cap on dead cap, players not on the roster. It's hard to win like that. The highest cap hit of any Giants player on the roster that Joe Schoen inherited, you know who that was, Nick? Kenny Galladay at $21.5 million against the cap, over 10% of their entire cap space going into that first season. So in addition to having one of the worst salary cap situations inherited by any general manager due to the general manager for him, here are the rookie contracts he inherited. You know, you talk about how hard it is for a GM. Part of being a GM is winning with rookie talent, having rookie talent develop, having that third, fourth year of that rookie class really hit its stride. He had Andrew Thomas with 2 years left plus a rookie option. Amazing. Dexter Lawrence, 1 year left plus a rookie option. Amazing. Xavier McKinney with 2 years left. Then it goes down. Saquon Barkley on a 5th-year option. That's not somebody he decided to re-sign, Joe Schoen. A lot of people, ourselves included, agree you don't pay money to a 27-year-old running back coming off injuries. Daniel Jones was the next one, 4th year, and he had his 5th-year option, which Joe Schoen and decided to decline. And then Julian Love with 1 year left. That's it. I look through it, man. Here are the draft classes that he inherited from Dave Gettleman. Like I said, we talk a lot about that third year being really important. Here are the draft classes he inherited. He inherited a class that had Saquon Barkley, Will Hernandez, Lorenzo Carter, BJ Hill, Kyle Ouellette, and McIntosh. The 2 hits from that class were Barkley, if you want to call it that. I'm debatable on that. And BJ Hill. He had already traded away the past GM, BJ Hill, for a player who was out of the NFL within months in Billy Price. Then Daniel Jones, Dexter Lawrence, DeAndre Baker, O'Shane Ximenez, Julian Love. So he got Lawrence and Love out of that class. Not much after that. Darius Slayton as well. Then Andrew Thomas, Xavier McKinney got those 2. Matt Peart, Darnay Holmes, Shane Lemieux, Cam Brown, nothing after that. And then Kadarius Toney, Azeez Ojulari, Aaron Robinson, Ellerson Smith, Gary Brightwell. I mean, that's what he inherited. So he inherited one of the worst cap situations of any GM, probably, in addition to not many great rookie contracts on the books. Thomas, Lawrence, McKinney, Love with 1 year left, Barkley on a 5th-year option, Daniel Jones, if that's considered a good inheritance. I mean, I really think it's important to understand the situation that he started with.
Yeah, and we talked about it so much too back in 2021. We're like, oh, whoever's coming in here is going to have a shit situation that they're going to have to rectify because Dave Gettleman did such a poor job drafting. And to be frank, so did Jerry Reese. I thought Jerry Reese left Dave Gettleman a really bad situation and it put Dave Gettleman in a spot.
Yes.
I think this was a mistake by the New York Giants where they were like, no, we're going to compete. Yeah, we're still going to compete. Let's sign Nate Solder. Let's sign Patrick Omameh. Let's sign all of these players and bring them in to try to freaking win when Eli Manning is in the waning years of his career. And that's what the Giants attempted to do. It's like the Giants haven't done a full rebuild. They haven't just loosened up the tourniquet and let it all bleed out. And they're not going to do it now because I feel like they actually have an infrastructure in place and they have made moves to compete once they figure out, I think, some certain parts of their roster. And they can even compete now if a quarterback position really solidifies this year and even gives them maybe 2022 type play or maybe a little bit better than that.
Sure.
Because you did sign Brian Burns. You signed Dexter Lawrence. You extended him. You have Andrew Thomas. You drafted Malik Neighbors. Like they could realistically compete. I think there's still some holes on the defense, quarterback position, all the things that we talk about here. But so I'm not advocating that they actually, blow it up and rebuild. Gettleman didn't blow it up and rebuild. And Schoen, I think, wanted to blow it up and rebuild, but they actually started winning games. So they decided to just run with it at that point.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you made about Reese too, because I don't think it's unfair to go back even as far as that, right? Think about 2017. Say it's a butterfly effect, things change, regardless of what it would have turned out to. If he takes Ryan Ramczyk or TJ Watt, well, Ramczyk now is the back issue. So let's just say he takes TJ Watt over Evan Ingram there in round 1. Watt is still the key player on this team right now. Watt is still one of the best players on your entire roster, and you have that instead of just not having that. which is what Joe Schoen has, not having that.
Instead of not having a tight end with the Jacksonville Jags.
Yeah, or whatever. And the rest of that draft class by Jerry Reese wasn't great either in 2017.
I think it's, So I think it's interesting, man. Well, Dalvin Tomlinson was an absolute beast, but
Yeah,
we actually
they let him go.
Yeah, but they had other defensive linemen that they drafted in subsequent years.
And that Dave Gettleman traded for Leonard Williams on despite having Dalvin Tomlinson.
I'm more so referring to Dexter, but yeah, that too. So I think it's really important. You hit on this like 10 minutes ago, but I wanted to circle back. Kenny Golladay was getting paid the most money of the roster that Joe Schoen inherited. Kenny freaking Golladay. Let's remember this. Kenny Golladay didn't see the field. Kenny Golladay was benched for freaking David Sills. That's the player who was making the most money. And everything that you went over, Dan, it's all very accurate, but that doesn't even take into account all the cap cuts that Joe Schoen had to do in his first year.
Right.
That affected his second year, the Kenny Golladay. Remember, taking the medicine now. We either going to take the medicine now, make him a pre-June 1st, or we're going to spread it out over years, make him a post-June 1st, right? So they took their medicine with the Kenny Golladay contract. They were still suffering last season through the mistakes of the previous regime.
Correct. And we're going to get into that as we get into the 2023 offseason, his second one, which led to obviously the disappointing year. And we're going to discuss that and compartmentalize what that meant last year's disappointment and what it means for 2024 as far as the hot seat goes. But I want to quickly run through some of what he did in free agency in his first year. That was when they re-signed Jalen Smith to play their linebacker position. They didn't have a Bobby Okereke option there. They signed a few, lesser players, Corey Cunningham, rest in peace, obviously, Danny Shelton, CJ Board was brought back, Jabril Peppers, they lost in free agency that year when he went to the Patriots. Lorenzo Carter, they lost in free agency that year when he went to the Falcons. Those were two guys that were brought in via the previous regime. Dave Gettleman, supposed to make a big impact. Lorenzo Carter was supposed to be their edge one. Jabril Peppers was supposed to be a big piece of that Odell Beckham trade. Guys that Shane did not feel were going to be pieces. And quite frankly, he was right on both. Like, Jabril Peppers is a solid player. They're not losing much by letting him go. Lorenzo Carter has not been great as well. Then he brought in Mark. So let's get into what he did in his first offseason from what he brought in, Nick. He brought in Mark Lewinsky. That was his biggest deal. He didn't have much money to work with. The biggest thing he can do from a play standpoint in his first offseason was a 3-year, $18 million contract. And that's not much, right? We're talking about like $6 million a year against the cap. That was the biggest play he could make. His second biggest play he could make, based on the shit cap situation Dave left him, was Tyrod to a 2-year, $11 million contract, about $6.5 million per season. Those were his big plays. The rest of what he did, Ricky Seals-Jones, flyer for nothing. Jihad Ward, flyer for $1.5 million. Richie James, a great flyer for $1 million that really made an impact. Same with Ward. I mean, those are two guys that made an impact on the season for flyer prices. You go down the list, Nick Williams. I mean, there's not much else from signed from other teams, at least, that he was able to do. Now, he got some guys that were cut by other teams. John Feliciano was a nice get for him. 1 year, $3 million there. Tanner Hudson had a little bit of an impact for a little while. And obviously he was able to sign Isaiah Hodgins in season to make a really big impact. But let's go over that first class, what he did.
Well, there was a couple other guys too that they signed after final cuts. Jason Pinnock, who was a starting safety, Fabian Moreau, who was a starter on that wild card winning season of 2022, Nick McLeod, who's still a key member of this team, specifically on special teams. We want to see him more on defense.
Correct.
And then, as you brought up, Isaiah Hodgins, I felt like all four of those signings were home runs. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to be these superstars, but they played a role for you. And they weren't just guys you brought in, was like, it's not really working out, let's get rid of them. No, they actually stuck to the roster for years. So I really want to applaud him for those four signings and the pro scouting department of the New York Giants. But with this first free agent class, look, I understand why you signed Mark Lewinsky. I'm sure at that time they knew they were going to go offensive line with one of those first two picks.
Sure.
You wanted that right tackle, whoever it was going to be, to have a sound offensive lineman starting at right guard. Now, was Mark Lewinsky that? I would say in the run game, he was actually an asset. He was a plus, but he was a liability as a pass protector. And it was much worse from the Colts film that I did see. I didn't think he was nearly as bad. I thought he was an average starting guard who was above average as a run blocker and a little bit below average as a pass blocker. I think it was a little bit different when he got to the Giants. I think he was a little bit above average as a run blocker, but very much so below average as a pass blocker. But just, man, like if we go back to that 2021 season too, just because it's important to this conversation, Will Hernandez played the most snaps of anybody on the offense. Then that was followed by Billy Price, Nate Solder, Matt Skura, and Andrew Thomas. So like that's the state of the offensive line. Obviously, Andrew Thomas, absolute stud, but you're talking about Nate Solder, Billy Price, Will Hernandez, and Matt Skura were the other starting offensive linemen. We have to remember that.
That was Dave's last year.
Yeah, it was 2021.
It's so embarrassing that that's what Dave had 4 years. Dave Gettleman had 4 years, and that was the final offensive line he had after 4 years. Just crazy.
It wasn't good. I mean, remember, prior to that
Matt
season,
Skura, Billy Price. Like, what are we
we
talking
had
about?
Kevin Zeitler, but we got
Out of
rid
the
of him.
NFL. And Dave got rid of Kevin Zeitler.
Yeah, and Ben Bredesen got hurt, I think, that season, so he only played like 294 snaps.
It just makes me so frustrated, man, to think back on it. I mean, they gave the guy 4 years. It did irreparable damage, but that's not what we're talking about here. But I like the point. I don't want to get into that. I'm saying I like the point by you. I don't want to go on too much of a Gettleman tangent, is what I was trying to say. To reel it back, though, it's like that situation. It's a good point you make, because it's like he was starting from such a scratch position on the offensive line, outside of one obviously great hit by Andrew Thomas, and a blue chip guy, but we've learned throughout this years, Nick, last year, the year before that, one offensive lineman doesn't make an offensive line. You know, I love what the people say, which is you're only as good as your worst offensive lineman, rather than having, you're better off having 5 pretty good, above average, solid starters in the O-line than 1 or 2 elite guys and 2 horrible guys.
100%. And another thing about the 2022 season, they really didn't have any injuries on the offensive line. Evan Neal dealt with some. He was dinged up, right? Evan Neal was
played hurt. Neal played hurt.
And he played hurt. And then other than that, it was Ben Bredesen got hurt against Jacksonville, which forced Josh Azudu back into the lineup. Thinking about it, I think Feliciano played the whole season. Glowinski played the whole season.
Feliciano missed like a game or 2 for Gates, if I remember.
Yes, I believe so. And so did, I think maybe Glowinski missed 1 game, and then Andrew Thomas was healthy. So there was a lot of continuity along the offensive line. And even with that, I would say the offensive line was definitely below average, specifically early on in the season. Like Daniel Jones was running for his life, to be fair to the kid, early in that season, like the Chicago games, like just don't even pass the football, just run the football, you know, use play action bootlegs. And the Giants did that and they won.
So before we get into his first draft class, Nick, I want to say a quick wrap up on what he did from a free agent / getting players from other teams standpoint. I think I would look back on this. I'm curious to get your take pretty favorably. So I'll say from this standpoint, yes, obviously the Glowinski signing was a miss there. That would be looked at unfavorably. I will say this from that standpoint, when you're dipping into that range of free agency in the guard market, again, not paying the high end prices, not even really playing the second tier prices, playing the third tier prices, essentially the 2-3 tier prices, it's going to be harder, but I'm fine giving him a miss there. To get Jason Pinnock for free, who's a starter now, to get Fabian Moreau, who was good that season, Nick McLeod, and Isaiah Hodgins, all for free by you just being shrewd, I would say overall, and even Tyrod Taylor, right? Tyrod Taylor gave the Giants really good snaps last year. Richie James was a big part of their 2022 season. Jahad Ward was a big part of their 2022 season. These are all guys who helped them get to, and John Feliciano, obviously a huge part of their 2022 season, and has somehow, by the way, like have amazing grades with the 49ers last year as a guard, but which is just funny because it just shows how unlucky, just where the Giants are at from that standpoint. But, you know, I would say overall, my take before we get into his first draft class is that the first free agent, what he did from that standpoint, given what he had to work with, I would give it a plus personally.
Yeah, I think it's, I would say it's about even. It's fine. Like it's a plus considering all the context.
That's what I mean.
Your big swing was a miss. Like there's no other, and I understand it. And I think there is nuance to it, but it was a miss. The guy didn't start his second season into the contract, and he was kind of a net negative for you in his first season.
Sure.
But I understand why you made the deal. And based on the tape that I watched of him with the Colts, he was not that bad in pass protection. But holy shit, did he hold the Giants offense back in 2022 when they actually had a good offense.
And we use the term big swing to say that all he was really able to do was a 3-year, $18 million contract. That's how bad the cap situation was.
Like you ever see like a 10-year-old swing a bat? That was the Giants during
what
that
a big swing. Yeah,
it's not a big swing for him.
When you have $55 million in dead cap inherited and some you had to push into the next season, that's what you get. But let's look at his first class. I knew now, look, we're only 2 years into this class having played in the NFL. We both are big believers, you and I, Nick, and you need 3 years to truly evaluate a class. But we can get some early thoughts going on it, and not just on where they've gone, but the process of it. His first draft class, he had picks 5 and 7 because Dave did one good thing for the future of the team, at least, sort of, even though it meant passing on Micah Parsons, which was trading back in 2021.
Isn't it crazy that even when he has a good process, somehow it ended up just being a disaster?
It is crazy that even Dave's one moment of good process as a general manager ended up being a bad result. It's so
it's kind of funny, man. It is kind of funny.
It is. I also feel like if we're going to be fair to the situation, it was only partly a good process by Dave. It was a good process to trade back, but then the second part of that process, which was as believed, as reported, and then it came true, he was getting a playmaker no matter what in that first round. Yeah. So he basically just went down his board of playmakers and came to Kadarius Toney next. Instead of going for the best player available once he traded back to pick 20 to take Kadarius Toney, he just went to the next highest guy on his board at playmaker, saying, no matter what, I need to get Jones a playmaker instead of, and that's in itself horrific process. So yes, the trade back was good process, but even in his moment of good process, Dave, he had to reel it back in and then make a horrible process move by saying, I'm getting playmaker no matter what. We like this Kadarius Toney. Like Darisaw sitting on the board, a clearly better prospect, doesn't matter. The process said, let Matt Peart grow. We need playmaker no matter what. And whenever you go position no matter what in the draft, you can lead to results like Kadarius
Not to mention it was somebody of the personality of Kadarius Toney
that they didn't spend extra time with. They didn't bring him in for a private visit. They didn't go down and meet with him. They just met with him a little bit at the combine. Just slap me in the face at how bad that is as a process. It's just furious that this is hurting us now, obviously, but it's just, it's Dave. It is what it is. You got to accept it. So anyway, so he's 5-7. He takes Kayvon Thibodeau at 5, a player who we thought at one point might be first overall pick. I mean, before, if you asked probably 12 months before that pick was made, a lot of people predicted him to go 1. Evan Neal at 7, who me and you had as one of the best prospects in the class. I think I had him as a 2 or 3. I thought he was the best tackle prospect in the class. Okay. Wan'Dale Robinson at 43. That one was interesting. He traded back twice, got to 43, took Wan'Dale. Josh Azudu at 67. Cordell Flott at 81. Bellinger at 112. Dane Belton at 114. 146 was Micah McFadden, which I think gets underrated at the fact that he found some production at a pick 146. TJ Davidson, 147, could have a role this year. Marcus McKethan, 173, and then Darren Beavers, 182.
Yeah, so it's too premature to say exactly who was hit in this class, but I think we can give those initial thoughts of how we believe it could manifest based on what we've seen so far. Kayvon Thibodeau, top 5 pick. Has he played up to being a top 5 pick? It's debatable. I don't think it's nearly bust level or anything silly like that. But has he actually been that top 5 pass rusher or top 10 pass rusher in the league? I don't think so. You think that's fair?
I think that's fair. I just don't know if the expectation of finding a top 5 or top 10 pass rusher at pick 5 in any draft class or overall is a fair. I know that's a barometer that is generally associated with these types of players, Nick. But I think if you look back at all the draft classes and see a lot of these top 10 edges that were taken, there's so much of a lower floor than people realize, right? Like the guy, Trayvon Walker, for example. Let's say we had taken Trayvon Walker instead of Kayvon Thibodeau. The difference in where we're at with that is astronomical. And then some of these other dudes, like those LSU guys who were taken in the top 10 in all those years, who were those guys? Mingo and all those like undersized edge guys that have like the edge bend that end up being just nothings in the NFL. They can't set the edge. Yeah, Jason, they can't set the edge. They can't get sacks. I mean, Kayvon Thibodeau has 15.5 sacks so far in 2 years. It's not like he's done nothing from a production standpoint. Obviously, we want more of the one-on-one pass rush situations to be wins. I think he's had some moments in the run game, some good, some bad, some good on the backside pursuit of plays. He's had some big-time plays. He had a strip sack, fumble, recovery for a touchdown against Washington that won them the game in 2022 single-handedly when their offense couldn't move the ball against Jack Del Rio, like shifting coverages away from the field side. Like, so he's had his moment. The Ravens game, the 4-sack fumble that played a big role in that win. I feel like he's played a lot better than most of these top 5 picks play at edge, but he's not in the top of that range. So he hasn't hit the elite range.
I agree with you. I think that was a really good case. It is what it is kind of thing. I don't think it's a great pick. I think he's playing well. He is a valuable asset on your team. It's fair to say we all expect him to take another step from what we've seen.
Right. And I think if he doesn't take that step, you can then say, okay, this was just a solid pick, or even if you want to say below that, that's fine. But for it to be a great pick, he has to take that next step. I agree entirely.
Okay. We're on the same page there. Evan Neal. It's been rough. I don't know what else to say. It's been rough, kids.
Well, this is the pick that will define Joe Schoen's tenure. This is the pick that could ultimately be the biggest case for why he should be on the hot seat. And that's the show. That's what we're talking about. If you want to find out by the end of the season if Joe Schoen's going to be on the hot seat or not, I think a lot comes down to if this player can develop and stay healthy this season. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. But I think Joe Schoen could get off that hot seat and lift his ass up. If Evan Neal continues to suck, Jermaine Illuminor steps in and the Giants go to the playoffs and actually have a respectable season in our team where people are like, oh, Giants aren't that bad because of Jermaine Illuminor, but Evan Neal's rendered ineffective, hurt, or kicked inside to guard.
I think that's completely fair. And I think if he's kicked inside to guard and is solid to above average at guard, above average to solid at guard, then I think we're fine there too. It's not what you wanted. You don't want to take a guard at 7th overall. It's just going to be a solid guard. But if those all factors come to play, one, Illuminor plays well at tackle. Two, the Giants make the playoffs, maybe win a playoff game. At that point, I think that the hot seat can be alleviated. And we're going to get to at the end of the podcast what we like benchmarks for us. And we're not here to set a win mandate, but we're going to have benchmarks, you and I, Nick, for what would put him on the hot seat after the season, what wouldn't. So I don't want to spoil all that, but I think that's a good point by you. Let's get to the next one. Wan'Dale Robinson. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, I'm pleased with the Wan'Dale Robinson pick. I thought it was peculiar when the Giants selected him, but I think they knew that Kadarius Toney probably wasn't in their long-term plans, and he's a tough SOB, and I think he's an asset for the offense.
I'm higher on this pick than I was when it was first made, actually.
Same.
Despite the fact that he's been injured and he missed some time, and despite the fact that the production isn't all there due to the fact that the Giants have a non-existent passing game, but like just to look at the sheer numbers of it, he has 83 receptions for 752 yards and 2 touchdowns through 2 seasons, with 11 carries for 86 yards and a touchdown through 2 seasons. So just 3 touchdowns, under 1,000 yards total rushing and receiving through 2 seasons. But as I've said on the podcast before, Nick, and I know you believe in this too, we're not really here to judge the total raw stats right now from this Giants receiver corps. I think it's unfair to judge them based on stats with Daniel Jones playing the way he played last year and the year before where they were dead rate last and explosive pass rates. I know he was productive as a scrambler. And then with the offensive line, being in the situation it's been.
Absolutely. Let's rapid fire these next ones. Josh Azudu.
Nope, not yet, but that's a 3rd round pick and hasn't hit yet.
Same with Cordell Flott. Daniel Bellinger's a hit. Dane Belton, I'm not going to say is a hit quite yet, but I remain a little bit optimistic about it. Mike McFadden is certainly a hit. And then I think the rest are to be determined. DJ Davidson, I think, is the most hopeful. And then Marcus McKeithen didn't look good last year, but he had a rough start to his career. He tore his ACL his rookie season. And then Darian Beavers also tore his ACL his rookie season and hasn't seen the field basically since.
Yep. And so Giants end up, like you said, starting 6-1, going to the bye week 7-2, going 3-7-1 down the stretch, but then bouncing back and winning a playoff game. So they go into the 2023 offseason with all of that in mind, but also with Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones set to hit free agency. They didn't pick up the Jones 5th year, and Barkley was coming off his final 5th year rookie option. So now Joe Schoen's in a position where the fan base is thrilled. They got a playoff win out of nowhere. People have to remember, going into 2022, the Giants were expected to be dead last, probably, or like bottom 3. They end up winning a playoff game. Now, can you come back to your fan base and tell them, that's it, we're going to retool, we're going to revamp, we're going to restart from scratch, we're changing our quarterback, we're changing our running back? I believe that's easier said than actually done. And that's where this really, the crux of this whole thing comes in, I think, for the Joe Schoen hot seat or not. A lot of fans believe he has the authority. He has the ability to just say at that point, that's it. The best thing long-term is to move on from Barkley and Jones right now and restart our plan. I'm not so sure that that's as easy said and done. I know one thing that's for sure, though, Nick, going into 2023, they still had a shit ton of dead cap. They had $56,450,000 in dead cap, the 9th most in the NFL. They came off Joe Schoen's first 2 years with the Giants, 2022, 2030. He had the 6th most dead cap and the 9th most dead cap space. Galladay and Kadarius Toney made up 10% of their cap last year, dude. 1/10 of their cap was allocated to those 2 duds. That one wasn't even on the roster, and the other also wasn't on the roster because he had to get traded because he was such an idiot.
Which is funny, Dan, because they both play wide receiver. The Giants just selected a wide receiver, and it just goes to show how evasive that position has been for the New York Giants. They've been looking for so long, and they made so many mistakes. And I don't think everything's squared away with Malik Neighbors, and he stays healthy. This kid is not a mistake. He is so much more talented than those 2.
Yep, 100% agreed. So they re-signed Daniel Jones, 4 years, $160 million. Let's start with that one. That's the big one, right, Nick?
Yes, and I'm very glad that and I think this is what we said. They had that 2-year out for a reason. Now he needs to show that he can play to the level of a $40 million quarterback. He didn't really do that at all last year. I would also say he didn't really get a good opportunity to prove that either, because the opportunity was such shit after Andrew Thomas got hurt.
This is the big point of contention, though, Nick. Should Joe Schoen be on the hot seat or not? Some people say this decision alone should disqualify him long-term in our minds as a general manager. The idea of if he's willing to make this decision to give Daniel Jones $160 million contract, he's not qualified or not your best option to win long-term as a general manager. Now, the other options for him at this point were let him walk, which we don't agree with because we didn't really see any plan for that. I mean, looking back, hindsight, or franchise tag him and sign Saquon Barkley. What are your thoughts on that idea that if he's willing to give this type of player $160 million, he's not going to be your long-term fix as a general manager?
Hey, I can understand that argument. I can. I think it all comes down to the options that you have, though. This is what we were saying back then. What were your other options other than blowing it up? I think it's so easy to say after we saw what happened in 2023. Why didn't they just blow it up after the 2022 season? I think it's so freaking convenient and easy to have that opinion right now.
I think if you asked us at the time, Nick, we didn't really feel like there was a long-term ceiling with the core of Barkley and Jones. It's not that we didn't. I know for a fact, me and you didn't. I know I didn't feel that way, and I think you didn't feel that way either. But even in that moment, with us not feeling that long-term ceiling with those two as your core, it doesn't mean you could just turn around and be like, that's it with this. We want a playoff game. There's a lot of pressure from the fans. There's a lot of pressure from ownership. These are factors that do factor in Joe Schoen's decision-making, like it or not. Maybe that makes him a bad GM, but I want you to go out there and find me a GM who's not, who's just avoiding all the pressure from the fans and from winning and the recency bias of winning and the owner and what they want. I don't think you're finding too many GMs who are like that, honestly.
Of course. What has John Mara said about Daniel Jones in his career? He said, "We've done everything in our power to screw this kid over." He has been expressed so much contrition over the fact that the Giants have not surrounded this kid with anything. And then in the first year of a new regime, this new regime is able to take Daniel Jones and that roster to the playoffs and win a playoff game. You're meaning to tell me that Joe Schoen was going to be able to turn around and say to John Mara, "Hey, bud, by the way, I know you really like this kid. And I know we showed a lot of progress. He can go screw himself. We're going to go in another direction." That would have been such a tough sell to ownership to do that.
It would have been, and it's a sell that he didn't make ultimately, and he didn't. We don't think he even tried to make it ultimately. But go ahead.
And dude, Joe Schoen too, man. Like, what did Joe Schoen say about Daniel Jones when they gave him that contract? Like, he's 25 years old. He's one of the hardest working players we've ever seen. He's first guy in, last guy, all those stupid cliches. He's big. He's strong. He's athletic. Where else were the Giants going to find somebody with that type of prototype to bring in? Like, I think that's one of the reasons why he gave him that contract. But I also don't think it was something that they loved either, because they built in that second year out. So this was like hey, we're going to give you a little bit of vote of confidence right here, but there's a short leash. And if you do not get it done and you don't prove a $40 million a year quarterback, then we're going to move on after 2 seasons. And that's what's going to happen unless something crazy happened in 2024.
It's a great point by you, because I'll tell you why. When they negotiated with with Daniel Jones' agent, who did a great job, by the way, baked in an injury guarantee, all those things, they probably had 2 routes they could have gone, Joe Schoen. One route would have been, we don't bake in that 2-year out, but we give less. So they might have got him up for 120 or 110 with a lot more guaranteed, 100 of it guaranteed or 105 of it guaranteed. They could have went that route. Instead, they went the route of less guaranteed because they want to have a chance to get out of this, and more upfront because, look, maybe at that point, like you said, there's a projection involved. Because I could say, hindsight looking back, Nick, to be quite honest with you, the case that other people would make, which is if you just moved on from Daniel Jones, honestly, based on what I saw on tape in 2023, you're not losing much with Tyrod Taylor. The case could even be made that if you put Tyrod Taylor in that 2022 offense, they would have been as good, if not better. I know a lot of fans are frustrated by that or just offended by that in some way. I'm not as offended by it, and I see it. I know enough tape. I even think if you put DeVito in that spot, you're not getting as much because Jones played well. But point being, in 2023, you obviously got as much, if not more, from those 2 quarterbacks. So that's the other side of the case. But I love that you brought the point of projection, because you couldn't have projected any kind of long-term ceiling with Tyrod Taylor, given his age and given what you said. He didn't have the size, he didn't have the physical traits that they like in Josh Allen and all the Drake May, all these quarterbacks that they've worked with. Jones had those physical traits. He had the age as well. He had a profile of somebody who could potentially project to being something that could take you to the next level. Tyrod was never going to project that. Neither was DeVito. And I think that's the biggest factor in what gave them the wherewithal to make that decision to sign Jones.
It 100% was the biggest factor. They basically said as much. You have a 25-year-old who we know is going to come in here and work his ass off, and who has a track record now of working with this coach and taking positive strides in his career. And that's what they saw. When it was going on, you and I know, man, go back and listen to that podcast. We were like, well, we better see some development. Like, we need to see a little more, because the Giants don't create any freaking explosive plays. So maybe we'll trust in the process here. Surround the kid. If you're going to bet on him, surround him with some talent, and we'll see. And I remain highly skeptical that we'll ever see another step in the Daniel Jones development.
We'll fast forward through some of the other moves he made in that offseason and get to it, the second biggest one. Obviously, re-signed Barkley for 1 year. I think we both agree that was a good move since they moved on from him and they were able to get out of that financially. Lost a player like Julian Love. I'm not as worried about that as others. I know he had a pretty good season with Seattle. I don't think it was as good as people thought it was, though. I think it was solid. He's a solid player. I don't think that killed him any means. Great job signing Bobby Okereke. I would put that in the win column for him. That was a fire signing for him. Okereke was so good on tape last year. Made some moves that tried to help them in the immediate time. Ashawn Robinson had a really good second half, things of that nature. And then the big one was trading that pick for Darren Waller. I feel like process-wise, I'm okay with that decision. At the time, we liked what we saw on tape from Waller. You could say he should have known this injury was going to happen. I don't know about that. And I think this goes back to what Joe Schoen says about these draft picks. He talked this way. Why do you put so much resource into these quarterbacks? Because he's like, we want to know about who they are when they become available, either via trade or free agency. And that's what he didn't have with Darren Waller. He didn't scout him. So I'm not trying to, don't read this the wrong way. Everybody has their own mental battle and issues and things that go on off the field. But Joe Schoen, what's going on with Darren Waller now, which is like, is he or is he not going to play football? That's from a mental standpoint. And that's not something I feel like, what'd you say?
He's got a lot going on right now.
He has a lot going on, right? He had divorce and everything. Like, that's not something Joe Schoen could have predicted, in my opinion. Like, that Darren Waller 1 year into this experiment was going to be like, I may retire. And at the same time, the opportunity cost, let's not make more of it than what it was. It was a 100th overall pick, a supplemental third-round draft pick that they got back from Tony. You could get good players there, Daniel Bellinger, Julian Love. Like, you can get solid starters there. So that's the opportunity cost. You might get that. You also get misses there, Matt Peart and things of that nature.
Yeah, of course. Look, if you're committing to the Daniel Jones, bringing back the band, bringing Saquon Barkley back, going for it again in 2023, you make that deal. And if you make that commitment, you make that deal to surround Daniel Jones with weapons. So that's why it's okay. I understand it didn't work. But again, if you're going forward with that as your plan, you better go all in with that as your plan if you're giving that type of money to Daniel Jones as a quarterback.
Exactly. Now, finally, we wrap up with where we're at now. The Giants finally cleared things out from a salary standpoint. It took them a long time. That's what Dave left them, but they only had $19 million in dead cap this offseason. That was 20th most in the NFL. That's a drastic shift from where they were in those first two Schoen years where they had so much dead salary cap space. And they're clearing it out even more. Next year is looking even clearer, Nick. It looks like it's even better position as they move forward. Their big move this offseason was to retool the offensive line with some depth pieces through free agency. That's the route they went. Well, obviously, the draft is not something we can judge right now in my mind. It's way too early to draft the 2024 draft. So let's set that table and let's say this, Nick. What do you need to see in 2024 for Joe Schoen to not be on the hot seat? And what, or let's, I got a better way to do this. What would have to happen for the Giants for Joe Schoen to not be on the hot seat? And what would have to happen for the Giants this season for Joe Schoen to be on the hot seat?
I think Joe Schoen right now, his seat is a little warm. I don't think it's cold, right? I don't think it's scorching either. I think this is a spectrum. And I think right now you could start entertaining questions of, hey,
wait, Nick, I want to back this up. I want to get your take on not what's actually happening, if he's on the hot seat or not. That I think is not important. I think what the listeners want to hear is what would happen for you, like in your mind, what would need to happen for him to be on the hot seat or for him not to be on the hot seat?
I'm saying right now, look,
okay,
the hot seat is not he needs to be fired. It's we need to start asking ourselves questions on if this is the guy. If there are people who want Joe Schoen on the hot seat and are placing him on the hot seat, I don't really have any problem with that. Me personally, I think it's safe to say the seat is warming up 3 years into a regime. I think it's safe to say that. I think it's premature, though, to say the seat is so hot that Joe Schoen needs to get his ass off of it. So that's where I'm at. I think it's fine, though, saying that the seat is a little warm, but I understand some of the nuances that put Joe Schoen into this position. So we're going to go and we're going to look at the end of 2024. If the Giants have a catastrophic season once again and it starts to fall apart, I think that seat really starts to heat up. But I also believe, though, that that's probably going to lead to a quarterback selection next year, which could also cool that seat down, which is kind of ironic, right? Because I think they could buy themselves another year if they can withstand and last this season, which would kick another year into the future of Joe Schoen, which maybe that was the long game the entire time, Dan, on why they didn't go with JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix in this draft class, because they wanted to go next year because they think they have a longer leash than they actually do. That's the conspiratorial side of me. I don't actually believe that. But I'm okay with fans saying, yeah, you're on the hot seat. But I don't think the seat is so hot that we should start saying this guy needs to get fired, because that is wildly premature in my opinion.
Okay, then let me rephrase that question for you. In Nick Filato's mind, What would have to happen in 2024 for you to want to move on from Joe Schoen?
2021 probably type of season
Okay.
where it's an entire meltdown, which there were elements that we saw last year of that happening with the coaching
Dable Wink
staff,
stuff.
with the Dable Wink stuff. Now, I trust Joe Schoen's process enough, and I understand that there was a really, I think now we could say, a mistake. You put all your chips into the Daniel Jones basket. It doesn't seem to be working out. You have that out, and you can exercise that out next year. But if I start seeing positive development from a lot of Joe Schoen's 2022 draft picks, specifically Evan Neal, if I start seeing that, or if Evan Neal doesn't and the Giants still get success from some of the free agents that he signed, I can start to rationalize to myself that he's done a good enough job to put this roster in a position to where it can compete if they figure out other really big questions with this roster, a la the quarterback position. Does that make sense, Dan?
It does. That was what I was going to get to next. What would have to happen in 2024 for you to be confident in Joe Schoen moving forward?
Dude, if they can win more games, and I can write off the 2023 season for the catastrophe that it was, and just like the incredible misfortune that the Giants did experience, and the fact that every calculated risk that Joe Schoen took last year, because that's what you do before every season. Every team does this. Every general manager does this. You take calculated risks. You say, I think the pros outweigh the cons here. Every single time Joe Schoen did that, it blew up in his face. It happened with Darren Waller. Darren Waller was a calculated risk. The Giants said, let's bring in Darren Waller and we could see if it works. It didn't work. Keeping 3 tight ends, one of them being Daniel Bellinger, the only one with any kind of blocking prowess. That was a calculated risk. Keeping Lawrence Cager was a calculated risk as a backup to Darren Waller. That was a terrible mistake. Having Josh Azudu as a swing offensive tackle, calculated risk. Andrew Thomas gets hurt on the first drive. Now Josh Azudu is your starting left tackle. Best of luck. Having little depth along the offensive line other than guys that you selected who all had injuries and didn't necessarily have a developmental plan throughout their NFL careers. That was a calculated risk. I would also say the Daniel Jones contract. The projection of Daniel Jones with Brian Dable was probably the highest swing, the highest ceiling swing for Joe Schoen. So they went with it, and that blew up in his face as well. Did I answer the question?
You did. And I think that last part was a very interesting point. And I know we've made it before, but it's very important to make. They were going for upside when they re-signed Jones. There was no projection on Tyrod Taylor at that point. I think Tyrod Taylor, personally, from what I've seen, could have been just as good in 2022 as Jones if he stayed healthy. But long term, that's not what we wanted. Nick and I never wanted 2022. We don't believe in what happened in 2022. We want consistent division winner that competes for Super Bowls. We don't want grind to a wild card, luck your way into facing the worst defensive coordinator in history and having a good game against that defensive coordinator before then going in the divisional round to Philly and being out of the game in the first quarter, which is what they were. That's not a good season when you're out of the game in the first quarter in the divisional round. It's a good season. I'm sorry. That's not an ideal season. That's not what we strive for. And I think what they strive for was Daniel Jones evolving under Dable to getting to a point where they could win the divisional round and then win the next round and maybe get to Super Bowls on a consistent basis. Tyrod was never taking them there. And no one on the free agent market last year, quarterback, was taking them there. And no one in the draft at pick 25 was taking them there either. And I think that's an important factor in their decision.
Go back to 2022. What was the primary conversation during the 2022 offseason? Had the Giants close the gap with Dallas and Philadelphia from a talent standpoint? We were all in the mindset that the Giants roster was just not talented enough to compete. And that was independent, I think, of Daniel Jones. I think a lot of people separated Daniel Jones from that conversation and was, let's get him the weapons. Let's fix up the offensive line. Let's maybe get some more playmakers on the defensive side of the football to help this roster round out, to look more like the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. And, and that was like what we were all talking about. Did we close the gap? Did we close the gap? We didn't close the gap. We unfortunately didn't close the gap, but not a lot of people were asking ourselves, how are we going to find a quarterback that's going to close that gap better than Daniel Jones? Like, where is that player? I think Daniel Jones, with everything he proved during the 2022 season, probably had the best resume to be that player at that time. Is that fair?
100% fair. He definitely had the best resume to be that player at that time because there's a projection involved with Jones. He's 25. He had all the physical tools, and the hope was that he can evolve from a mental standpoint.
I want to ask you that same question now.
Yeah.
First off, is Joe Schoen to you on the hot seat at all? Because I think it's fair to say his seat is warming up. I don't think it's unfair to say it. We're 3 years into this thing at this point.
So is the question, does Dan Schneider think should be on the hot seat or is on the hot seat, or do I think the Giants are putting him on the hot seat? That's my question.
Both. That's a
Okay.
good one.
So first of all, I'll answer I do not think the Giants have him on much of a hot seat right now. I think they have a long-term plan. And I think the fact that they didn't go quarterback in this draft proves to me that he has a longer leash than people assume, because otherwise he would have went with a quarterback and forced it and convinced himself and told John, you know what, we do believe in JJ long-term. Even if he didn't fully believe in it, he would know that would buy him extra years. So I think he's not actually on the hot seat. Should he be on the hot seat? Now I have things that will factor into that. So here's what would put him on the hot seat for me. Okay. It's less to do with wins. So I'll explain first. Let me explain why it's less to do with wins. First, why he's not on the hot seat for me, why it's hard to be on the hot seat, is a 30,000 foot view. I don't believe too much in recycling general managers. I'm not, unless they have a bad process. I wanted Dave out immediately because of his process. I'm not so certain we're going to find a great general manager. You can't just keep firing and hiring guys and expecting great things. Like, look at what happened to Washington this offseason, dude. Adam Peters, we think could be good. We don't know that for a fact. He thinks he could be good. We're going to get another guy just like that we think could be good. It's the next Joe Schoen, Adam Peters. But guess what? They had to hire Dan Quinn. No offense. Like, Dan Quinn's probably a fine coach. I'm not so sure. He didn't do that great. Like, that's not inspiring. Like, if they go back to the new GM, new coach, like, and like, you can maybe get Ben Johnson, but if you don't get Ben Johnson, I'm not inspired. I'd rather have Brian Dable and Joe Schoen than some next Joe Schoen and some coach that I don't really feel good about developing a quarterback. So I want to start there. Secondly, for me, I'm not as interested as far as if he's on the hot seat or not, Nick, and if he wins a lot of football games here. I'll tell you why. Wins to me are very variance based. The Giants could have won that Patriots game. They did win. They could have lost that game. They could have won both Washington games. They did win. They could have won the Green Bay. They could have lost that game. They could have won the Bills game. They lost that game. They could have won the Jets game. They lost that game. I've just went through, and that's just off the top of my head, 6 games that could have won or lost. And that's a whole totally different record based on that. So what I need to see to keep him off the hot seat is development from his draft classes. That's what it comes down to for me. Tangible evidence on film. And we are going to take the time to watch and break down the film. I need to see jumps. I don't care if it translates to wins or not, personally, at all. I want to see these guys develop as players and then have a projection for them in 2025 that they can be a better version. Or we're already seeing it in 2024. Yes, they still may lose games by a score here, a score there, a fumble here, a fumble there, a missed kick there, a missed kick here. But as long as they're progressing, that keeps them off the hot seat for me. But things that can put him on the hot seat, Nick, number one, by far, he plays Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones gets a season-ending injury, and now he can't pass his physical for next March. And Joe Schoen is allocating $49 million in cap space or whatever it will be to Daniel Jones in 2025. That's number one hot seat for me. That's the one that puts it right to the top. If that happens, I'm at the point where I can say I am teetering on the verge of I need him out.
All right, I think we're coming at this from a different perspective, a little bit, just slightly. On a scale from 1 to 10, how hot is Joe Schoen's seat right now?
Look, for me, or for
10 is the hottest. 10 is the hottest. You.
Oh, for me. I'm probably low on. I'm probably at a 3.
That's where I'm at. Okay.
Okay.
But it's getting, that's the exact number that I had in mind. It's not to the point where we're like saying, yo, he like this needs to happen or he's out. But I think the seat is, a little warm. Yeah. I don't think it's unfair to say that.
And the big,
but I also don't think it's fair to say.
Yes, the big factors are: will he carry $50 million in dead cap with Daniel Jones in 2025 if Jones gets injured? That's factor number one, because $50 million is a lot of dead cap. And we just did a whole podcast expressing how he got himself out of this dead cap situation. It took him 3 years to get out of ghetto in this mess. He was 6th most dead cap, 9th most dead cap in his first offseason. If he goes back to having a top 5 dead cap, but Daniel Jones injury guarantee kicks in, plus the $22 million they already owe Jones in dead cap once they cut him next offseason. Now we're talking about almost $50 million in dead cap. That puts him back on because he dug himself out of this hole and then he puts himself right back into a hole. And where are we 4 years later? Back in the same hole that we started with at that point. So that's a big one for me. The second one, it's 2 factors for that put on that. The second one is the 2022 class. I don't want to judge 2023 class. It's not enough time. But at this point, 2022, that'll be 3 seasons in the NFL, right? So if Evan Neal, Kayvon Thibodeau, Josh Azudu, Cordell Flott, Wandale, those 5, let's talk about those big 5, really. And I could throw Belton in the mix, but I think they've done a lot with the other picks. If they can't get a lot out of those 5 this year from a development standpoint and from a production standpoint, and we can't project confidently going into 2025, all 5 of those, or 3 or 4 of the 5 of those, it's hard to hit on 5. Let's say 3 of those. If we can't confidently project some kind of role for 3 of those, Nick, that's when I start to entertain the hot seat. And that's when it goes from a 3 to maybe a 5 or a 6.
That's my point. Look, I think it's completely fair to say that the seat is at a 3. That's where I'm at. Where I think it's premature is people who are saying it's at like an 8 or a 9. That's where I would take a little bit of contention with their point. But I want to also understand and hear why they're there.
Sure.
Exactly. And a lot of it probably comes down to that Daniel Jones contract. And it's just a lot of conjecture for us to actually know how much that was Joe Schoen. At the end of the day, it was him signing it off, but John Mara has been known to be Jerry Jones once in a while, right? Like, I don't think it's unfair to say that, especially with his past comments about basically his affection and how he felt like the Giants really did not position Daniel Jones into a place where he could succeed.
Yes, and that's part of it. And I think when it comes down to, Nick, for you and I, we're going to wrap up here, is just you and I have a different barometer at the quarterback position. I think both of us, and it just from picking up on our conversations with you, I don't know, you can correct me if this is not how you feel, but I think both of us kind of feel like this game ain't as easy as people make it out to be. Finding your quarterback, making the right decision on quarterback. So I can put that aside in my assessment of if he's on the hot seat. But if he gets himself out of the dead cap hole that Gettleman left him in, and then 4 years later, we're right back in that dead cap hole with the Jones contract and other contracts, that's a sign of that's bad progression over 4 years. And then the second thing is, if those draft picks don't develop, those are two really big factors that I think make it really fair to put him on the hot seat.
I think
so. That's what it comes down to for me. Don't get yourself back in that bad cap situation, and then you need some progression out of your picks. And
yes, 100%. I'm so glad you nailed that, dude. Like,
don't yet other people want to put wins as the top of that. Wins to me is way down the list. Those two things are way ahead of wins for me as far as Joe Schoen's hot seat goes.
And that's like I think the one issue that a lot of Giant fans will never see like eye to eye on with this is right now, if you are using wins as your barometer, and even if you're not, the quarterback is still the same.
Right.
It's the same quarterback from
it wasn't easy to change that either. That's the thing people don't understand. This isn't easy.
I know. And people might look at this, Dan, and say, well, look, you're saying like, oh, well, you understand how you're speaking out of both sides. I really don't think we're speaking out of both sides right now, because I just think this is a very complex issue. And you have to take the way everybody was viewing certain transactions and certain decisions that were made. You have to remember what was going on at the time of when those decisions were made, what other options were available to the Giants when those decisions were made. I think you have to do that. But if after this season, the Giants suck again, like, that's still that same quarterback. And you did decide to give him that contract. And now you can finally get out of that contract. It's like, do you actually, I think you're right. I think the Giants have given him a vote of confidence, and it's going to take a lot to have Joe Schoen get fired this season. I think that's where the Giants are. I think that's a very good point that you made before. Yeah, man. I don't know, man. If you don't figure out this quarterback spot, which a lot of teams don't, as we've seen, like 2021, this is a historically good quarterback draft class. One of those guys is good, and he's not even as good as we all thought he was going to be in Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about this draft class like that. Joe Schoen's not smarter than the rest of them. These guys took Penix and Nix in the first round. Like, all right, let's see in a few years if we're still saying it was such a smart decision to draft Michael Penix and Bo Nix. I'm waiting to find out. Even JJ will find out on that one, even though he inherits the greatest situation possible there.
Look at the 2012 draft. Wasn't that long ago? Cam Newton. Oh, this guy, or the 2011 draft. Oh, this guy's amazing. It's great. And then you have Christian Ponder, Jake Locker, and it's like 20. I think Colin Kaepernick and Andy Dalton were in the second round. So you hit some guys in the second round, but holy shit, dude, it was rough in the first round. There were a lot.
That was the last time a quarterback was taken 6, 8, and 10, like it was, or not 6. What was it? 8, 10, and I forgot what the other one was. 8, 10, and 12, I think, was the quarterbacks in that class. That was the last time. What was McCarthy 12 or 11 in this class? 8, 10, and 12, 11? Whatever the picks were.
Gabbert was 10 in the 2011
Okay,
class.
so it's 8, 10, and 12. That's what it was in this class. Yes. The last time quarterbacks were taken 8, 10, and 12, it was those three quarterbacks, Nick. And this year was Penix, McCarthy, and Nix. So I'm just saying, it's not, and I'm just telling you, I could 100% see scenarios where this looks more like 2011 than it does whatever the pie in the sky idea of what these three quarterbacks can be is. I would even tell you, Nick, if I had a gun to my head, what's more likely, these three quarterbacks are all great quarterbacks and Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen got it wrong, or these three quarterbacks are the next Pond or whatever. I don't think they'll be that, but if it's one or the other, I think it's 100% more likely that they're going to be that than they're going to be all great quarterbacks.
I think JJ could be the guy who bucks that, though.
Sure, and I agree with that. But the chance of it being one way, if it's one or the other, there's the weight is you're falling off the seesaw toward they're not going to work out versus they're going to work out. I think that's the big factor and why I don't care that the Giants passed on those guys.
And it's just freaking absolutely insane that there were no day 2 quarterbacks, right?
Yeah. They all got sapped up in round 1.
They all got sapped up in round 1. Spencer Rattler felt like the 5th round or something.
Nobody wanted Rattler. That's that you know, the off-field stuff. He must have been bad in interviews, you know. Must have been real bad in interviews.
Dude, a lot of people were saying that it was because of the show.
I know.
When he was like 16, 17 years old.
Up, but he was a douche in that show. But he's a 16-year-old kid. We all were douches back then, or at least I know my brain sucked back then. My brain's not even great right now, but it has matured in some ways. All right. We're going to end it on that note. Fun conversation. I like doing the 30,000 foot view stuff. This is, you know, a conversation about if you should be on that hot seat, what it means to us and where we're at with it. And so things are going to change, but that's where we're at right now. Thank you so much for tuning into Big Blue Banter and for supporting the show. If you want to help support the show, make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you but make sure you download and subscribe on iTunes or Spotify or Google Pod, wherever you get the podcast. That's all we'll ask of you. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.